At 4 a.m., my sister stole my keys. By sunrise, my brand new SUV was wrapped around an oak tree. My mother slapped me for being irresponsible. "Stop accusing your sister," she screamed, her face twisted in rage. I did not argue. I did not shed a tear. I simply touched my cheek and looked at the wreckage. Because I knew something they did not. The car they destroyed was not mine. It was my mother's. My name is Jordan, and at 30 years old I learned that silence is the most expensive weapon you can own. Before I tell you how I evicted my entire family in 24 hours, please like and subscribe if you have ever been the scapegoat in a family of golden children. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. The sound of metal screaming against wood tore through the silence of our Atlanta estate. It was not a simple fender bender. It sounded like the end of the world. My heart hammered against my ribs, but I did not turn on the light. I slid out of bed, my silk pajamas cool against the humid night air, and crept to the window. My bedroom on the second floor offered a perfect theater box view of the circular driveway. Below me, the massive, ancient oak tree that had stood for a century now had a modern sculpture embedded in its trunk. Steam hissed from the crushed hood of a black SUV. The headlights were shattered, flickering like dying stars. I reached for my phone to dial 911, but my thumb hovered over the screen. The driver's side door groaned open. A man stumbled out. Even in the dim security lights, I recognized the blonde hair and the staggering gait. Tyler, my perfect brother-in-law. The man who looked down on me because I worked in finance while he came from old money. He was clearly intoxicated. He swayed, grabbing the doorframe for support, looking around wildly to see if anyone had witnessed his crime. Then I saw him do something that made my blood run cold. He did not check the damage. He scrambled to the passenger side and yanked the door open. He pulled my sister Aaliyah out. She looked limp, like a rag doll, barely conscious. Instead of helping her, he dragged her body around the front of the mangled car, avoiding the glass, and shoved her into the driver's seat. He was framing his pregnant wife for his drunk driving. My grip tightened on the velvet curtain. A normal sister would have run downstairs screaming. A normal daughter would have rushed to save her family. But I was done being normal. I looked at my nightstand. Sitting right there next to my water glass was the key fob to my brand new Porsche Cayenne. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. In their haste and greed, they had grabbed the wrong set of keys from the foyer bowl. They thought they had taken my car for a joyride. Instead, they had taken the keys to the Ford Explorer my mother had just bought with her pension fund. The car she had canceled the collision insurance on yesterday to give Tyler cash for an investment. I watched Tyler stumble toward the front door, practicing his shocked face. I let the heavy curtain fall back into place, blocking out the scene. I did not call the police. I did not go downstairs. I simply climbed back into bed, pulled the duvet up to my chin, and closed my eyes. The show was just beginning, and I needed my rest. By 8 in the morning, the flashing blue lights of the police cruiser finally faded from our driveway, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. Officer Miller, a man who had attended my father's barbecues years ago, closed his notebook with a sympathetic nod. He bought the story completely. According to the official report, my sister Aaliyah had swerved to avoid a deer that darted out from the tree line. There was no mention of alcohol, no mention of speed, and certainly no mention of the hit and run that happened 3 miles away. I stood at the top of the spiral staircase watching the performance unfold below. It was masterclass in manipulation. Aaliyah was collapsed on the velvet love seat, her face buried in our mother's cashmere shawl. She sobbed loud, theatrically gasps that shook her small frame. Mom was stroking her hair, murmuring soothing words that she had never once spoken to me in 3 decades. My poor baby mom cooed, glaring at the open front door, as if the oak tree had personally attacked her daughter. "You are safe now. That is all that matters. The car can be replaced, but you cannot." Tyler stood by the window, peeking through the blinds to watch the tow truck back into the driveway. He looked pale, his eyes bloodshot and rimmed with red, but the arrogance was still there. He had managed to charm the officer out of a breathalyzer test claiming his wife was in medical distress due to her pregnancy. He had successfully shifted the blame and now he was just waiting for the wreckage to disappear so he could wash his hands of the crime. I walked down the stairs, the heels of my slippers clicking rhythmically against the cold marble. The sound was like a gavel striking a block, and it made everyone freeze. Aaliyah stopped crying instantly. Mom stiffened. Tyler turned around, his jaw tight. I held my ceramic mug with both hands, taking a slow, deliberate sip of black coffee. I did not rush to them. I did not ask if everyone was okay. I simply walked past them toward the open door and looked out at the crushed metal sitting on the manicured lawn. The front end of the SUV was an accordion. The radiator was hissing steam onto the grass. It was a total loss. From the corner of my eye, I saw the neighbors peeking out from behind their hedges. The spectacle was humiliating, but my family did not care about the humiliation of the accident. They only cared about the narrative. I turned back to face them. My expression was blank, devoid of the panic they expected. I saw the confusion flicker in Tyler's eyes. He expected me to be screaming about my insurance premiums. He expected me to be weeping over my new leather seats. Instead, I just leaned against the doorframe and raised an eyebrow. The air in the foyer crackled with tension. They were waiting for me to explode so they could call me crazy. They wanted me to be the villain so they could justify what they had done. But I denied them that satisfaction. I just watched them watching me, and the silence stretched until it became unbearable. I opened my mouth to speak, to ask the simple question of why they were celebrating a felony in our foyer, but I never got the chance. My mother moved with a speed that defied her 60 years. I saw the flash of green first. It was the heavy jade ring on her right hand, an heirloom that had belonged to my grandmother. A woman who would have been disgusted by this display. Beatrice wore the ring like a crown, but she wielded it like a weapon. The impact cracked through the room like a gunshot. My head snapped to the side, the jagged stone cut my lip and I tasted copper. The sting was sharp and hot, spreading across my cheek instantly, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the shock of her audacity. I did not stumble. I did not raise a hand to defend myself. I just stood there, letting the silence after the slap ring louder than her shout. "You are the oldest, Jordan," she hissed, her voice trembling with a rage that felt rehearsed. "How could you be so irresponsible? How could you let your sister drive in that condition? You are supposed to protect her." I touched my bleeding lip, looking down at the woman who had birthed me. The accusation was so absurd it was almost impressive. I had been asleep on the second floor. My keys had been on my nightstand. Aaliyah had stolen them, entered a garage she had no business being in, and destroyed a vehicle. Yet in Beatrice's twisted version of reality, this was my failure. In this house, Aaliyah was the protagonist and I was the eternal antagonist, the obstacle, the failing safety net. "You knew she was stressed about the baby." Beatrice continued, poking a manicured finger hard into my chest. "You know how fragile she is right now. But you were probably too busy sleeping or dreaming about your bank accounts to check on your family. If she had been hurt, Jordan, if my grandchild had been hurt, it would be on your hands." Behind her on the sofa, Aaliyah let out a fresh, well-timed wail, burying her face deeper into the cushions. It was a perfect performance. She knew exactly when to cry to stoke our mother's fire. Beatrice spun around, gesturing to the weeping girl. "See what you have done," Beatrice snapped, turning back to glare at me. "You are upsetting her again with your coldness. Look at you standing there like a statue. Do you even care? Do you have a heart in that chest, or is it just a calculator? Apologize to your sister. Now." I looked at the jade ring again. There was a smear of my blood on the green stone. It was a perfect metaphor for our relationship. She drew blood and demanded I apologize for staining her jewelry. I straightened my spine, feeling a cold calm settle over me. I looked my mother in the eye. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I simply said nothing. My silence was a mirror, and she hated what she saw in it. She raised her hand again, her eyes wide with the intent to strike me a second time to force the submission she felt she was owed. But before the hand could fall, a heavy grip settled on her shoulder, stopping her mid-swing. It was Tyler stepping out of the shadows to take control of the narrative. Tyler descended the staircase like a judge entering a courtroom. While the rest of us were in pajamas or robes, he was fully dressed in a navy blue bespoke suit, his silk tie perfectly knotted against a crisp white shirt. It was a chilling sight. It meant he had not gone back to sleep after the crash. He had spent the last 4 hours showering, scrubbing away the smell of gin, and preparing his defense. He stepped between me and my mother, physically blocking me from the sister he had just framed. "Enough," he said. His voice was calm, authoritative, and dripping with the unearned confidence of a mediocre man who has never faced a consequence in his life. He adjusted his cufflinks, looking down at me from the bottom step, using the elevation to his advantage. His blue eyes were cold, devoid of the panic I had seen in the driveway hours ago. "Let's not turn a tragedy into a tribunal, Jordan," he continued, smoothing his lapels. "Aaliyah is in a state of severe shock. As her husband and legal counsel, I am advising her not to speak until she has medically stabilized. You screaming at her is not helping. In fact, it could be construed as harassment, given her delicate condition." I almost laughed. I had not said a single word since coming downstairs. I had been slapped and silenced, yet he was painting me as the aggressor. This was Tyler's superpower. He could twist reality until the victim apologized to the offender. He walked over to the side table and poured himself a glass of water, his hand steady. "The priority right now is mitigation," he lectured, turning his back to me to check his watch. "Call your insurance provider immediately. We need to get a claim number generated before the tow truck leaves. Tell them it was a single vehicle accident caused by a deer crossing. Do not mention the time delay. We do not want to give them any wiggle room to deny coverage." He turned back to face me, a smirk playing on his thin lips. "And Jordan, make sure you emphasize that Aaliyah had permission to use the vehicle. We do not want any confusion about liability. My wife needs rest, not a deposition. You work in finance, so surely you understand the logistics of asset protection. Just handle it." He waved his hand dismissively, shooing me away like a servant. To him, I was not a person. I was an ATM with a pulse. I was the fixer who was expected to clean up the blood while he kept his hands clean. He put a protective arm around Aaliyah, kissing her forehead, while looking directly at me with a challenge in his eyes. He thought he had checkmated me. He thought his suit and his law degree gave him immunity in this house. He had no idea that the vehicle he was ordering me to claim was uninsured and owned by the woman standing right next to him. Breakfast was served exactly 1 hour later, as if the felony in our driveway was just a minor inconvenience, like a spilled glass of milk. The smell of maple syrup and crisp bacon filled the dining room, masking the lingering scent of burnt rubber and gasoline that drifted in through the vents. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, my plate empty, save for a single slice of dry toast and black coffee. The seating arrangement had never felt more political. To my left, Tyler was aggressively cutting into a stack of pancakes, his knife screeching against the fine china with a violence that made me wince. To my right, Aaliyah was picking at a bowl of fresh berries, her eyes still puffy but perfectly dry now. At the head of the table, Beatrice presided over her kingdom, pouring tea from a silver pot with a steady hand. They formed a tight, impenetrable triangle of solidarity, leaving me on the outside looking in. It felt like I was a ghost haunting my own house, invisible, until they needed someone to blame. Aaliyah broke the silence first. She did not look at me. She looked at her husband, seeking his approval, before she spun her web. "I honestly thought you left them out for me, Jordan," she said, popping a grape into her mouth. "You know I have been having terrible cramps lately. I needed to get to the 24-hour pharmacy for my prenatal vitamins, and Tyler was sleeping so deeply I did not want to wake him. I saw the keys on the console table, and I just assumed you were being a good big sister. I thought you left them there because you knew I might need to go out." I stared at her over the rim of my mug. The lie was so bold it was almost breathtaking. My keys had been on my nightstand inside my bedroom on the second floor. She had to have crept into my room while I slept like a thief in the night to steal them. But pointing that out would only earn me another lecture on selfishness. She was rewriting history in real time, turning her theft into a misunderstanding and my anger into pettiness. Beatrice set down her teacup with a sharp clink. Her gaze was soft when she looked at Aaliyah, but hardened into flint when it turned to me. Exactly, she chimed in, buttering a biscuit with aggressive strokes. You were not using the car, Jordan, you were asleep. Why are you making such a fuss about possession? In this family, we do not hoard things. What belongs to you belongs to your sister, especially now that she is carrying the first grandchild. You act as if she took the car to go joyriding when she was clearly taking care of her health. It is just a car, Beatrice added, waving her butter knife dismissively at me. A hunk of metal and plastic. You can buy another one with that fancy bonus you are always bragging about. Or better yet, let Tyler handle the replacement since he knows more about automobiles than you do. You should be grateful your sister is safe instead of sitting there sulking about property values. I watched them eat. They were feasting on my supposed misery, devouring my assets along with their breakfast. They truly believed they were entitled to everything I worked for. Aaliyah believed she had a right to my keys. Beatrice believed she had a right to my bank account. And Tyler believed he had a right to my silence. They were so busy justifying their theft that they missed the most important detail. They were fighting over who had the right to destroy my car, without realizing they had actually destroyed their own financial safety net. I took a bite of my dry toast. It tasted like cardboard, but I swallowed it with a smile. Let them eat. They would need the energy for the eviction notice that was coming. A screen was thrust into my line of sight, blocking my view of the uneaten toast. Bright blue light illuminated a number that would make most people choke. $85,000. I blinked, looking from the digital estimate to Tyler's expectant face. He had calculated the cost of his crimes and decided I was the bank that would finance them. This is the estimate for a rush job at a private body shop I know in Buckhead, Tyler said, tapping the screen with his index finger. They specialize in discreet repairs for high-profile clients. No insurance paper trail, no police reports. We keep this entirely in the family, but they need a deposit immediately to accept the vehicle. He pulled a chair out and straddled it, sitting backwards to face me like a cool youth pastor trying to relate to a delinquent teen. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. Look, Jordan, we are in damage control mode. If the press finds out Aaliyah crashed a car while pregnant, the optics will be disastrous for her charity work. And for my firm. We cannot afford a scandal right now. Beatrice chimed in from the head of the table, not even looking up from her tea. Oh, stop looking so pained, Jordan. We all know how much your bonus was last year. You bought that condo downtown without blinking. Consider this an investment in your niece's future. You have done well for yourself in that cutthroat finance world. It is time you shared some of that good fortune with the people who raised you. I looked at the number again. They were asking me to pay nearly $100,000 to fix a car they destroyed, to cover up a drunk driving incident committed by my brother-in-law. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. They thought they were extorting me for my mother's car repairs. They had no idea they were asking me to pay for the destruction of my own property. You want me to write a personal check? I asked, keeping my voice flat. Right now. Tyler nodded, producing a fountain pen from his breast pocket, as if he had anticipated this exact moment. He slid my checkbook across the polished wood table. It is the only way to ensure silence, Jordan. Unless you want your sister to be dragged through the mud. Unless you want the stress to cause a miscarriage. You are the only one with the liquidity to handle this problem today. Think of it as purchasing peace of mind. I picked up the heavy, expensive pen. It felt cold in my hand. I looked at Aaliyah. She was watching me with wide, greedy eyes, waiting to see if the scapegoat would fall in line one last time. She did not look sorry. She looked entitled. I opened the checkbook. In my head, I was already calculating the interest I would charge them for this. Every dollar I wrote on this check was another nail in the coffin I was building for their lifestyle. I pressed the nib to the paper. Make it out to Prestige. Otto Tyler directed, a triumphant smile spreading across his face. I wrote the date. I wrote the amount. My signature was a sharp, jagged line at the bottom. I tore the check out with a ripping sound that echoed in the quiet room and slid it across the table. Tyler snatched it up, blowing on the ink as if it were a winning lottery ticket. He thought he had just secured his freedom. He did not know he had just accepted a document that proved he was trying to cover up a crime. I capped the pen and pushed it back to him. Is that all I asked? Or is there a service fee for letting you ruin my morning? The ink on the check was still wet, but I did not tear it out of the book. I let the pen hover over the paper, my hand perfectly still. The silence in the room shifted. It was no longer the silence of a victim being bullied. It was the silence of a predator watching prey walk into a cage. I looked up slowly, locking eyes with Tyler, and then shifting my gaze to my mother. I needed them to say it on the record. I needed them to seal their own fate with verbal consent. Are you absolutely certain? I asked, my voice quiet and steady. You want me to handle the liability for this specific vehicle? You want me to take full responsibility for the car sitting in the driveway? Beatrice slammed her teacup down so hard tea sloshed onto the white tablecloth. Oh, for heaven's sake, Jordan, do not be so dramatic. Of course we want you to handle it. Who else is going to do it? Aaliyah is pregnant. Tyler is busy saving his firm. You are the only one with the time and the resources to clean up this mess. Stop acting like a martyr just because we are asking you to be a decent sister. Tyler leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. Why are you stalling? Are you trying to back out? You have the money. You have the insurance policy. Just make the call or write the check. Stop trying to negotiate your way out of family obligations. It makes you look petty. I looked at Aaliyah. She was watching me with that familiar mix of pity and disdain. Just pay it, Jordan, she whined. God, you are so stingy. You care more about your bank balance than you do about my stress levels. It is just money. You can always make more. I lowered my eyes back to the checkbook to hide the spark of amusement that I knew was visible in my pupils. They had no idea what they had just demanded. By insisting I take responsibility for the car, they were unknowingly admitting that they had no idea whose car it was. They were demanding I use an insurance policy that did not exist for a vehicle I did not own. Very well, I said, closing the checkbook with a soft thud. I will take care of it. I will handle the claim. I will talk to the authorities. I will make sure the owner of that vehicle gets exactly what they deserve. Tyler relaxed, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. See, was that so hard? That is all we wanted. A little cooperation. Next time, try to be helpful without us having to twist your arm. I stood up, pushing my chair back. I did not finish my coffee. I did not look at them again. I walked out of the dining room, feeling the weight of their judgment lift off my shoulders. They thought I was retreating to my room to cry or to call my insurance agent. They thought they had won. But as I climbed the stairs, I wasn't thinking about insurance premiums. I was thinking about the dashcam footage uploading to my private cloud server and the property deed I had in my safe. They wanted me to handle the car, so I was going to handle it, right down to the last screw. To understand the magnitude of the trap they had just walked into, we have to rewind 12 hours to the previous night. The house was dark, bathed in the cold blue light of the moon coming through the skylights. I had come out of my room to get a glass of water when I heard the hushed giggling coming from the foyer. I stopped at the top of the landing, blending into the shadows. Downstairs, Tyler and Aaliyah were stumbling around the entryway. They were already intoxicated, having returned from a dinner party where the wine had clearly flowed freely. Tyler was leaning against the wall, loosening his tie, while Aaliyah rifled through the crystal bowl where the family kept our car keys. Let's take the Cayenne. Tyler whispered, his voice slurred but filled with greed. I want to see what that German engineering feels like on the open road. Come on, babe. Your sister is asleep. She is so boring she probably went to bed at 9. She will never know. Aaliyah giggled, the sound sharp and malicious. She does not deserve that car anyway. A single woman with no kids driving a Porsche while I am stuck in that sedan. It is ridiculous. Let's take it. If we scratch it, we will just tell her someone keyed it in the parking lot. She is so desperate for our approval she will believe anything. My grip tightened on my water glass. They were discussing stealing my property and damaging it with the casual entitlement of people who had never worked for a dollar in their lives. I watched Aaliyah's hand hover over the bowl. I could have walked down the stairs. I could have shouted. I could have confiscated my keys and caused a scene. But earlier that same morning, I had overheard another conversation that changed everything. I had heard my mother on the phone with her insurance agent. She was canceling the collision and comprehensive coverage on her Ford Explorer. She had told the agent she needed to liquidate the prorated premium refund to give Tyler extra cash for his failing investment firm. She had stripped her own car of protection to feed his ego. A plan formed in my mind instantly. It was cold and calculated. I waited for them to stumble into the kitchen to find a corkscrew. I moved silently down the stairs, my bare feet making no sound on the carpet. I reached into the crystal bowl. My new Porsche key fob was heavy and sleek. My mother's Ford Explorer key fob was also black and roughly the same shape. In the dark, to two drunk people, they were indistinguishable. I picked up my keys and slipped them into my pocket. Then I took the Ford keys and placed them right on top where my keys had been. I did not steal anything. I simply protected my asset and gave them access to the one vehicle in the fleet that was completely uninsured. I retreated back to the shadows just as they came back into the hall. I watched Aaliyah grab the Ford keys thinking they were mine. I watched them stumble out the door. I went back to bed and slept the sleep of the just knowing that whatever happened next was not my fault. It was karma. Beatrice found me in the hallway 10 minutes later. The anger that had fueled her earlier slap had evaporated, replaced by a cloying sweetness that was far more dangerous. She reached out and smoothed the collar of my blazer, her fingers lingering near the spot where her ring had cut my lip. This was her signature move. First, she broke you. Then she offered to be the one to glue you back together, provided you did exactly what she wanted. "I am sorry I lost my temper earlier, Jordan," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You know how high my blood pressure gets when Aaliyah is in trouble. I did not mean to hurt you. But you have to understand my position. Aaliyah is not like you. She is fragile. She breaks under pressure. You were always the strong one, the oak tree that shelters the sapling." I stood perfectly still, letting her rewrite history. I was not strong because I wanted to be. I was strong because she had forced me to carry the weight of this family since I was 16. She mistook my survival instinct for loyalty. "We need to make sure this accident disappears completely." Beatrice continued, pressing a cold kiss to my cheek. "If you take care of the financial side and keep the police away, I promise I will make it up to you. I am rewriting my will next month. I was thinking of giving the lake house to Tyler, but if you handle this for us, I will make sure your name is on the deed. You have always loved that property. Just be a good daughter this one last time, and I will ensure you get your fair share." I looked at her eyes. They were dry and calculating. There was no love there, only transaction. She was dangling a future inheritance like a carrot on a stick, a property I knew she had already mortgaged twice to pay for Aaliyah's wedding. She thought I was stupid. She thought I was desperate for her approval. I took a step back, breaking her physical contact. She flinched slightly, fearing rejection. "You do not need to worry, Mother," I said, keeping my voice devoid of emotion. "I have already made the decision. I am going to handle this situation personally. I will speak to the authorities and the insurance adjusters today. I will make sure that the person who owns that car gets exactly what is coming to them. And I will ensure that the driver faces the appropriate justice." Beatrice let out a sigh of relief, clutching her chest theatrically. "Oh, thank God. I knew I could count on you. You are a good girl, Jordan. I knew you would do the right thing for the family. Go on then. Go to work. Make the money to fix this mess. We will have a nice dinner tonight to celebrate your generosity." She turned and walked back toward the dining room, already forgetting my existence now that she thought I was useful again. She did not hear the ambiguity in my promise. She heard "I will fix it." What I actually said was, "I will finish it." I grabbed my purse and walked out the front door, past the wrecked Ford Explorer that she thought was my Porsche. As I climbed into my actual Porsche Cayenne, which was parked safely down the street, I pulled out my phone. It was time to make the call that would turn their celebration into a funeral. I dialed the number for the fraud department. The game was on. The front door had barely clicked shut behind my mother when Tyler cornered me in the hallway. The mask of the concerned husband dropped instantly, replaced by the sneer of a man who believed he had just successfully robbed a bank. He leaned against the banister, blocking my path to the kitchen, checking his reflection in the hallway mirror. He adjusted his tie, admiring the knot before turning his cold blue eyes on me. "You know, Jordan," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "I almost feel sorry for you. Standing there with your checkbook and your empty life trying to buy your way into our good graces. It must be exhausting being the outsider in your own family." I did not respond. I simply stood my ground, clutching my purse, waiting for him to finish his victory lap. He took my silence as submission. He stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of expensive cologne and stale gin. "You are jealous of her, aren't you?" he whispered. "You look at Aaliyah and you see everything you failed to achieve. She has the beauty, she has the charm, and most importantly, she has me. A husband who adores her, a baby on the way. And what do you have? A career, a lonely condo downtown. You are almost 31, Jordan. In our circles, that is practically ancient. You are drying up while your little sister blooms. That is why you are paying for the car. Not because you are generous, but because you are desperate to be relevant." His words were meant to cut deep, to target the insecurities society tells women they should have. But coming from a man who had just framed his pregnant wife for a felony, his insults felt like compliments. If being successful and single meant I did not have to be married to a man like Tyler, then I was winning. "Speaking of the car," Tyler said, checking his watch impatiently. "Since my vehicle is currently indisposed in your driveway and the Ford as well, you know I am going to need transportation. I have a very important meeting with a potential investor at the Ritz-Carlton in an hour. I need you to authorize a rental on your corporate account. Get me something luxury, a Mercedes or a BMW. I cannot show up to a business meeting in an Uber. It sends the wrong message." I looked at him. He was wearing his lucky tie. He had reapplied his cologne, and his phone, which he was clutching tightly, buzzed with a message that made the corner of his mouth twitch. Investors did not meet at the Ritz on a Tuesday afternoon. Mistresses did. "Of course, Tyler," I said, keeping my face impassive. "I would hate for you to miss such a crucial opportunity. I will call my travel concierge and have a car sent over immediately." He smirked, tapping my shoulder with a patronizing pat. "Good girl. Maybe if you keep this up, we will let you be the godmother. But do not get your hopes up. We would not want your bitterness to rub off on the baby." He walked away, whistling a tune, already mentally moved on to his afternoon tryst. I watched him go, pulling out my phone. I dialed the rental agency. I ordered the car he asked for. But I also added a specific request to the rental agreement. I authorized the vehicle to be equipped with a real-time GPS tracker for corporate liability purposes. If Tyler wanted to drive on my dime, I was going to see exactly where he was going. And I had a feeling his destination was going to be very useful in court. By 2 in the afternoon, the estate had transformed from a crime scene into a carnival. The wreckage of the Ford Explorer had been towed away by the discreet service Tyler had demanded I pay for, leaving only a patch of crushed grass and shattered glass near the oak tree as evidence. In its place, a DJ booth had been set up on the patio, and a catered buffet lined the poolside. I watched from the kitchen window as guests began to arrive. These were not family friends coming to offer support after a traumatic accident. These were influencers, social climbers, and the idle rich of Atlanta's social scene coming to worship at the altar of Aaliyah. My mother had dismissed the catering staff early, claiming their hourly rate was exorbitant, so naturally the duty of serving the guests fell to me. I walked out into the humid afternoon air, balancing a heavy silver tray of iced lemon water. The bass from the speakers thumped in my chest, mocking the pounding headache that had not left me since sunrise. Aaliyah was lounging on a white daybed under a cabana, looking nothing like the fragile, traumatized victim she had portrayed at breakfast. She wore a sheer designer caftan over a white bikini, her hair perfectly styled and her face full of makeup. She held a glass of what looked like sparkling cider, but knowing my sister was likely expensive champagne disguised as a mocktail. She was holding court surrounded by three of her closest friends, women, who looked like carbon copies of her with their surgically enhanced features and disdainful expressions. I approached the cabana silently, my sandals making no sound on the hot stone deck. They did not notice me. They were too engrossed in Aaliyah's storytelling. "It was insane, you guys," Aaliyah said, gesturing wildly with her glass. The airbag literally exploded in my face. But honestly, it was kind of a rush. And the best part is Jordan totally panicked. She felt so guilty about leaving her keys out that she literally begged me to let her handle it. Her friends gasped in performative shock, leaning in closer. "Wait," one of the women asked, adjusting her oversized sunglasses. "Your sister is paying for everything. Even the car." Aaliyah laughed, throwing her head back. "Of course she is. She bought that car specifically for me to use anyway. I told her I wanted to test drive something big for the baby, and she practically threw the keys at me. It is honestly pathetic how hard she tries to buy my affection. She is like my personal ATM. I crash it, she buys it. That is the arrangement." I froze. The tray in my hands felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She was not just lying about the accident. She was twisting my financial abuse into a story about her own power. She was turning me into a desperate, pathetic figure who paid for the privilege of being used. One of the friends spotted me then. She nudged Aaliyah, who turned to look at me. There was no shame in her eyes, only annoyance that her servant was hovering too close. "Oh, look, speaking of the devil," Aaliyah said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Jordan, be a doll and fetch us some more ice. This is melting. And try to smile. You are bringing down the vibe with that funeral face." I set the tray down on the side table with a clatter that made them jump. I looked at the ice melting in the bucket. I looked at the car keys sitting next to Aaliyah's phone keys to a rental car I had paid for an hour ago. "Enjoy the party, Aaliyah," I said, my voice low and smooth. "Make sure you get plenty of rest. You have a big day ahead of you tomorrow." She rolled her eyes, dismissing me with a wave of her hand. "Whatever, just get the ice." I walked back toward the house. I did not get the ice. Instead, I went into the study and logged into the cloud server where the dashcam footage had finished processing. She wanted to tell stories about crash tests. I decided it was time to prepare a presentation of my own, one that would crash her entire life. The drive from the suffocating atmosphere of my mother's estate to the gleaming glass fortress of downtown Atlanta took exactly 40 minutes. In that time, I shed the skin of the downtrodden daughter and stepped into my true self. The valet at the Apex Tower opened my door before the engine even cut off, greeting me with a respectful nod that was a stark contrast to the way my family looked at me. Here I was, not the spare part. I was the engine. I took the private elevator to the 45th floor. As the door slid open, the hum of a billion-dollar private equity firm greeted me. Heads turned as I walked down the corridor. Conversations stopped. Postures straightened. This was the world I had built from nothing, a world my family knew nothing about because they never bothered to ask what I actually did for a living. To them, I was just a girl who worked with numbers. To the financial world, I was the managing partner of Sterling Capital, the woman who decided which companies lived and which ones died. My executive assistant Marcus was waiting at my desk with a tablet in hand. He was a sharp young man with impeccable taste and discretion, the only person in the world who knew the full extent of my family's situation. "Good afternoon, Ms. Banks," Marcus said, falling into step beside me. "I have the updated dossier on the distressed asset acquisition you requested. The financials are worse than we thought." I walked into my corner office. The view of the city was breathtaking. From here, I could see everything, including the Ritz-Carlton where Tyler was currently cheating on my sister. I sat down in my leather chair, the seat of power that felt more like home than my actual bedroom. "Show me," I said. Marcus placed the tablet on the mahogany desk. The screen displayed the financial autopsy of a company called Vantage Point Ventures. It was Tyler's firm. The firm he claimed was booming. The firm he used to justify his arrogance. The red ink on the screen told a different story. He was leveraged to the hilt. He had borrowed against everything, including his future commissions, and apparently, my mother's retirement fund to keep the lights on. And here was the kicker. His primary creditor, the entity that held the lien on his business, his office space, and even the lease on his flashy Mercedes, was a shell company owned entirely by Sterling Capital. I owned his debt. I owned his career. I effectively owned him. "He is 90 days past due on the primary loan," Marcus noted, tapping the screen. "Under the terms of the contract, we have the right to call in the full amount immediately. If he cannot pay, we can seize his personal assets." "Shall I have legal draft the foreclosure notice?" I looked at the numbers. I thought about Tyler standing in my hallway calling me jealous. I thought about him forcing me to pay for the car he crashed. He was strutting around like a king while standing on a trapdoor that I controlled. "Not yet, Marcus," I said, leaning back and spinning a heavy silver pen between my fingers. "Do not trigger the default clause today. Let him think he has gotten away with it. Let him enjoy his party and his mistress. I want him to feel completely safe." I looked out the window at the skyline. When we pull the rug out, I want him to be standing tall so the fall breaks him completely. "Wait for my signal. We will execute the asset seizure tomorrow night." Marcus nodded, a small, knowing smile playing on his lips. "Understood. I will keep the sharks at bay for 24 more hours." I turned the tablet over face down. I had work to do. My family thought I was their servant. They were about to learn that I was their landlord, their banker, and their executioner. That evening, the dining room was filled with the perfume of my Aunt Sarah and the booming laughter of Uncle Robert. My mother had summoned the extended family for what she called a celebration of life, but what was actually a tribunal to assassinate my character. The table was set with the fine china I had bought for her last Christmas, though nobody mentioned that. I sat at the far end next to a cousin who was busy texting, ignoring the glares my mother shot in my direction. Beatrice waited until the pot roast was served to begin her performance. She tapped her glass with a spoon, silencing the room. "I want to propose a toast," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "To my daughter Aaliyah and her husband Tyler. We almost lost them today. It was a terrifying ordeal, but God was watching over this family." A chorus of amen and hallelujah rippled through the room. Aunt Sarah clutched her pearls, looking at Aaliyah with wide, watery eyes. "What exactly happened, Beatrice?" "You said on the phone it was a mechanical failure." Beatrice sighed, casting a disappointed look at me. "Well, we are still waiting for the official report. But the truth is, it was a preventable tragedy. You know how Jordan is? She is always so scattered. She leaves her things lying around without a care in the world. Last night she left her car keys right on the foyer table instead of in the secure box where they belong." Aaliyah chimed in on cue, rubbing her small baby bump. "I woke up in such pain. I was so scared for the baby. I saw the keys, and I just grabbed them to get to the pharmacy. I did not know Jordan had neglected to service the brakes. I stepped on the pedal, and nothing happened. I could have died. My baby could have died because my sister cannot be bothered to clean up after herself or maintain her vehicle." The room turned to look at me. The judgment was palpable. Uncle Robert shook his head, slicing his meat aggressively. "Jordan, you need to be more responsible. You are a grown woman. You cannot leave dangerous things lying around where a pregnant woman might trip over them or use them in an emergency. I gripped my fork until my knuckles turned white. The lie was so layered it was almost impressive. First, I was careless for leaving keys out. Second, I was negligent for having bad brakes on a brand new car. They were rewriting reality to make Aaliyah the victim of my imaginary incompetence. It must be hard for you, Aunt Sarah added, her voice dripping with condescending pity, being single at your age while your younger sister is building a family. But you cannot let your jealousy manifest as carelessness. You have to think about the safety of this child. I took a slow sip of wine. They were baiting me. They wanted me to scream that Tyler was drunk. They wanted me to shout that Aaliyah was a thief. If I did that, I would look like the hysterical, jealous sister they painted me to be. I am very sorry, everyone, I said, my voice calm and deadly smooth. I will make sure to be much more careful with my possessions in the future, especially my assets. Beatrice beamed, thinking I had submitted. That is all we ask, Jordan. Just grow up and take some responsibility. I smiled back at her. I was taking responsibility. I was taking the responsibility of destroying them. As they ate and laughed, blaming me for their crimes, I was mentally drafting the eviction notices. Let them enjoy the pot roast. It was the last free meal they would ever get from me. I excused myself from the table, leaving my half-eaten dinner behind. I needed air. I needed sanity. I stepped out onto the back patio where the humidity of the Georgia night clung to my skin like a damp sheet. My phone buzzed in my hand, lighting up the darkness. It was a picture of my father smiling on a golf course in Florida. He had moved 3 states away 5 years ago, finally escaping Beatrice's suffocating control, but leaving me behind to deal with the fallout. I answered, hoping against hope that he would be the voice of reason. I wanted him to tell me I was right. I wanted him to be outraged that his ex-wife and her favorite child were framing me for a felony. "Hey, Dad," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I am so glad you called. You are not going to believe what is happening here." I heard him sigh, a long, heavy sound that I recognized instantly. It was the sound of a man who had spent 30 years avoiding conflict at all costs. "I already spoke to your mother, Jordan," he said, his voice weary. "She told me about the accident. She said you are refusing to help Aaliyah." I gripped the phone tighter. "Help her," I repeated, my voice rising. "Dad, she stole my keys. Tyler crashed the car while drunk. They are trying to make me pay for it. They are lying to everyone." "Now, Jordan, lower your voice," my father soothed. "You know how your mother gets when she is stressed, and Aaliyah is pregnant. We have to think about the big picture here. Is it really worth fighting over a car? You have done so well for yourself. You have the money. Why not just make this problem go away for the sake of the family?" I felt a cold pit open in my stomach. I had always thought of my father as the victim. I thought he left because he couldn't survive Beatrice. But in that moment, I realized he was not a victim. He was an enabler. He was a coward who would rather sacrifice his daughter's dignity than have an uncomfortable conversation with his ex-wife. "They committed a crime, Dad," I whispered. "I know, baby girl, I know," he said, dismissing the felony like it was a parking ticket. "But you are the strong one. You have always been the strong one. Aaliyah needs protection. You don't. You can handle the heat. Just be the bigger person. Do it for me. I don't want to get dragged into a legal battle down here. I just want peace." He did not want peace. He wanted quiet. There is a difference. He was asking me to absorb the abuse so he would not have to hear the noise. He was asking me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. I looked at the glass door. Inside, I could see Tyler laughing and Beatrice pouring more wine. They were monsters, but at least they were honest about it. My father was worse. He pretended to be good while handing ammunition to the enemy. "You are right, Dad," I said, my voice turning into ice. "I am strong. Strong enough to handle this my way." "Good girl," he said, relieved. "I knew you would understand. Give them my love." I hung up the phone. I stood there in the dark, realizing that the cavalry was not coming. There was no hero in this story. No wise parent was going to swoop in and save me. I was completely and utterly alone. And strangely, that realization did not break me. It liberated me. If I was alone, that meant I answered to no one. I turned back toward the house. If they wanted the strong daughter, they were going to get her, and she was going to burn their house of cards to the ground. I walked back into the living room just in time to witness the next phase of the hostile takeover. The atmosphere had shifted from a family gathering to a business transaction. Tyler was sitting on the ottoman directly in front of my mother, holding her hands in his. He looked like a televangelist about to ask for a donation to buy a private jet. "Beatrice," he said, his voice low and earnest. "This accident really shook me. It made me realize how fragile everything is. If something had happened to Aaliyah today, if we had lost her or the baby, I do not know what I would have done. It got me thinking about security, about legacy." My mother nodded, her eyes wide with concern. "Of course, Tyler. We are all just so thankful she is safe." "That is just it," Tyler continued, pressing his advantage. "Safety is not just about physical health, it is about stability. Aaliyah is stressed. She feels insecure about our living situation. I think for the sake of the baby, we need to settle matters permanently. I think it is time we transferred the deed of this house into Aaliyah's name." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. He was not asking for a nursery. He was asking for a multi-million-dollar asset. He was trying to secure a golden parachute before his company completely collapsed. Beatrice did not even hesitate. She did not consult a lawyer. She did not think about her own retirement security. She just smiled benevolently. "Oh, Tyler, if that will give my grandbaby peace of mind, then consider it done. This house was always meant for Aaliyah anyway. She is the one building a family. She is the one carrying on the legacy. I will call the family attorney first thing in the morning and have him draft the transfer of ownership." Then she turned her head and saw me standing there. The benevolence vanished, instantly replaced by the cold practicality of a general rearranging troops on a board. "And Jordan, since this is going to be Aaliyah's house officially, we need to make some changes to the living arrangements. Aaliyah needs the master suite. It has the best light for the baby, and the attached sitting room is perfect for a nursery." I stared at her. The master suite was currently occupied by her. She was offering to move out of her own room for them. "I will move into the east wing," Beatrice continued. "And Jordan, you will need to vacate your room on the second floor. We need that space for the nanny and the night nurse Tyler is hiring. You can move your things into the guest room downstairs off the kitchen. It is smaller, but since you are always at the office, you hardly need the space anyway." Tyler turned to look at me, a smirk playing on his lips. He had not only secured the house, but he had successfully demoted me to the servants' quarters in one fell swoop. "It makes the most sense, Jordan," he said. "You are a guest here, really. Aaliyah is the lady of the house now. She needs the space to nest. You understand, right?" I looked at the two of them plotting the distribution of an asset that neither of them legally owned anymore. They were moving chess pieces on a board that I had already set on fire. I had bought the mortgage on this house 2 years ago through a blind trust when my parents were drowning in debt. Technically, I was the landlord. Beatrice was a tenant, and Tyler was a trespasser. "Of course," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "I understand perfectly. I will start packing my things tonight. I want Aaliyah to have everything she deserves." Beatrice clapped her hands together, delighted by my submission. "Wonderful. I am so glad you are finally being cooperative. Maybe there is hope for you yet." I turned and walked toward the stairs. I would pack my things all right, but I would not be moving them to the guest room. I would be moving them into my car. Because once I dropped the bomb I was planning for tomorrow night, nobody would be living in this house. I spent the next hour dismantling my life, packing my clothes into cardboard boxes, while the sounds of celebration continued downstairs. My room, the sanctuary I had paid to renovate with my first bonus, was being stripped bare. I was folding a silk blouse when the door pushed open without a knock. Aaliyah waddled in holding a glass of sparkling cider, surveying the room like a conqueror inspecting her new territory. She did not offer to help. She simply criticized, running a finger along the top of my dresser and grimacing at the dust. "You have so much junk, Jordan," she said, wrinkling her nose. "I am going to have to hire a professional cleaning crew to fumigate this place before the baby comes. I do not want my child breathing in your stale energy." I ignored her, continuing to pack. I just wanted to be done. I just wanted to get out before I said something that would ruin my plan for tomorrow. But Aaliyah was not satisfied with my silence. She wanted a reaction. She walked over to my nightstand, where the only object I had not yet packed was sitting. It was a silver-framed photograph of Grandma Rose. It was taken the summer before she died, the only summer I ever felt truly loved in this family. In the photo, Grandma was holding my hand, ignoring Aaliyah and Beatrice in the background. It was my most prized possession, the one physical reminder that I had once mattered to someone. Aaliyah picked it up, holding it by the corner as if it were contaminated. "God, I hate this picture," she sneered. "Grandma looks so haggard here. And look at you. You were such an awkward teenager. Why do you keep this? It is depressing." "Put it down, Aaliyah," I said, my voice low and dangerous. She looked at me, a wicked glint appearing in her eyes. She saw that she had finally found a nerve. She held the frame out at arm's length over the hardwood floor. "You are so uptight," she said, enjoying the power trip. "I am just looking. You know, Tyler says you are hoarding this house because you are trying to compensate for having no family of your own. Maybe if you got rid of this old junk, you would actually find a man." She opened her fingers. Gravity took over. The heavy silver frame hit the floor with a sickening crunch. The glass exploded, sending shards skittering across the wood. The metal bent on impact. The photo of Grandma Rose lay exposed and vulnerable among the jagged debris. I froze. The air left my lungs. Aaliyah covered her mouth with a feigned gasp, but her eyes were dancing with malicious delight. "Oops," she said, her voice devoid of any real apology. "My hands are just so swollen from the pregnancy. I am so clumsy lately." "Oh well, it was just an old picture anyway. You can probably print another one from the cloud." She stepped over the wreckage, kicking a piece of glass under the bed with her foot. "Clean that up before you leave, Jordan. I do not want glass in the nursery." She turned and walked out, humming a tune, leaving me alone with the ruins of my heart. I knelt down, picking up the photo, shaking the glass off Grandma's smile. A shard cut my finger, and a drop of bright red blood fell onto the black and white image. I looked at it, and I felt something inside me snap. It was not a break. It was a release. The last tether of loyalty, the last shred of hesitation was gone. They had taken my money. They had taken my house. Now they had desecrated my memory. I wiped the blood from the photo and stood up. The packing was done. It was time for war. I locked the door to my room for the last time. The broken glass was swept into a pile in the corner, a sparkling monument to my sister's cruelty, but I did not look at it. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed blue in the dark room, illuminating my face like war paint. It was time to assemble the arsenal. I dialed Harrison, my personal attorney. It was almost midnight, but he answered on the first ring. He knew that when I called at this hour, it wasn't to chat about the weather. It was to bury someone. "I need the papers, Harrison," I said, my voice steady. "The foreclosure notice for the estate, the call option on Vantage Point Ventures, and the draft of the eviction notice. Have them couriered to me at the gala tomorrow night. I want them in a red folder." Harrison hesitated for a fraction of a second. "Are you sure, Jordan? Once we execute these, there is no going back. You will be effectively rendering your mother homeless and bankrupting your brother-in-law. It is the nuclear option." I looked at the empty space on my nightstand, where Grandma Rose's picture used to be. "I am sure. Prepare the documents." I hung up and opened my secure cloud server. The upload from the rental car GPS was already active, showing Tyler's vehicle parked at a motel on the outskirts of the city, not the Ritz-Carlton. I took a screenshot. That was the appetizer. Now for the main course. I clicked on the file named Dashboard Camera Front and Interior. My heart rate sped up as the video buffered. The footage was crystal clear. I watched Tyler stumble into the driver's seat of my mother's Ford. I heard the slur in his voice. I heard Aaliyah laughing, urging him to drive faster. Then came the impact. The camera shook violently. The audio captured the sickening crunch of metal on wood. But it was what happened after the crash that was the true weapon. "Oh my God," Tyler Aaliyah screamed. "We are screwed. We are so screwed. Jordan is going to kill us." "No, she won't," Tyler mumbled on the recording, his words thick with gin. "We will just say you were driving. You are pregnant. No cop is going to breathalyze a pregnant woman. We will blame it on a deer. And we will make Jordan pay for it. She is desperate for us to like her. She will pay." I paused the video. There it was, a confession. Conspiracy to commit fraud. Filing a false police report. And an admission that they viewed me as nothing more than a desperate wallet. I saved the clip and backed it up to 3 different servers. Next, I opened the financial dossier my forensic accountant had sent over regarding my mother's finances. It was worse than I thought. Beatrice had taken out a 3rd mortgage on the estate to fund Aaliyah's lifestyle. She was 3 months behind on payments. Technically, the bank could have foreclosed weeks ago, but the bank had sold the debt to a private holding company. My holding company. I looked at the documents spread out on my digital desktop. I had the evidence of the crime. I had the proof of the affair. I had the deed to the house. And I had the debt that owned their souls. I closed the laptop. The weapon was loaded. As the safety was off. All I had to do now was walk into that party tomorrow and pull the trigger. The morning of the gala arrived with a deceptive calm. The house was buzzing with hairstylists, makeup artists, and florists, turning the living room into a staging area for Aaliyah's big night. I was invisible to them, a ghost moving through the machinery of their vanity. I was in the kitchen drinking black coffee and reviewing the timeline of the asset seizure on my phone when Aaliyah swept in. She was wearing a silk robe that cost more than most people's mortgage payments, and her face was plastered with a hydrating sheet mask, making her look like a serial killer from a horror movie. She slapped a piece of paper onto the granite counter in front of me. "Read this," she commanded, her voice muffled by the mask. "Memorize it. Do not improvise." I looked down at the paper. It was a script, a literal script, typed out in 12-point font titled Jordan's Apology Speech. I scanned the lines. It was a masterpiece of fiction. It had me admitting to being jealous of her pregnancy, confessing to being careless with the car keys, and thanking her for her infinite forgiveness. It ended with me presenting her with the keys to the new Porsche as a peace offering for the baby. "You want me to read this on stage?" I asked, looking up at her. In front of 300 people, Aaliyah peeled the mask off, revealing glowing skin and a sneer. "Yes, I do. The donors love a redemption arc, Jordan. It makes me look benevolent, and it makes you look well. It makes you look like you are trying to be better. It is a win-win. Plus, Tyler says we need a public display of unity to squash any rumors about the accident. So you will go up there, you will cry a little if you can manage it, and you will give me the keys to the replacement car." She leaned in closer, her eyes hard. "And do not wear that gray suit you always wear. Wear something festive. I do not want you looking like a librarian at my event. This is the launch of the New Beginnings Foundation. I need everything to be perfect." I looked at the script again. She was asking me to humiliate myself to cement her lie. She was asking me to hand over a $100,000 car that I had paid for while apologizing for a crime her husband committed. It was the ultimate power move. She wanted to break me publicly to ensure I never tried to stand up to her again. I folded the paper slowly and slid it into my pocket. A smile touched my lips, one that did not reach my eyes. "You do not have to worry, Aaliyah," I said, my voice smooth as silk. "I will be there. And I will not just read the script. I have prepared a special surprise for you, a gift that goes far beyond a car. I think it is going to be the highlight of the evening. Aaliyah's eyes lit up with greed. She assumed I had bought her jewelry or perhaps set up a trust fund for the baby. She had no idea that the surprise was a forensic audit and an arrest warrant. Good, she said, patting my cheek with a damp hand. I knew you would come around. Just make sure you do not try to outshine me. It is my night. She turned and sashayed out of the kitchen, shouting orders at the florists. I watched her go. She was right about one thing. It was going to be a night of new beginnings, just not the kind she was expecting. I finished my coffee and went to get dressed. It was time to put on my armor. The grand ballroom of the St. Regis Atlanta had been transformed into a sanctuary of wealth and deception. White orchids cascaded from the ceiling in waterfalls of expensive blooms, and crystal chandeliers cast a diamond-like glow over the city's elite. From the balcony looking down the room appeared to be a sea of black ties and designer gowns swirling around the center of gravity that was my sister. Aaliyah stood beneath the largest light fixture, looking every inch the benevolent philanthropist. She wore a custom white maternity gown that shimmered with hand-stitched pearls, designed to make her look like a Madonna figure. She touched her stomach constantly, a calculated gesture to remind every donor that she was a vessel of life and virtue. Tyler stood by her side, his hand possessively on the small of her back, playing the role of the doting father, to be to perfection. He laughed at donors' jokes and accepted checks with a humility that I knew was entirely manufactured. He looked relaxed, confident, and completely unaware that the ground beneath his Italian loafers was about to crumble. They looked perfect. They looked untouchable. They looked like they had gotten away with it. I watched them for a moment from the entryway, my heart beating a slow, steady rhythm against my ribs. Usually I would have slipped in through a side door wearing a sensible gray suit blending into the wallpaper like the good little accountant everyone expected me to be. I was the background noise to their symphony. But tonight was not a night for blending in. Tonight was a night for burning down. I signaled the doorman and he threw open the double mahogany doors. I stepped through the main archway. I was not wearing gray. I was wearing a floor-length gown of liquid midnight blue silk that clung to my body like a second skin. It was backless daring and cost more than the car Tyler had crashed. I had paired it with diamond drop earrings that caught the light with every movement, and my hair, usually pulled back in a severe bun, was loose and cascading down my shoulders. The conversation near the door died instantly. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd like a wave spreading outward from my location. Who is that? Is that the sister? Is that Jordan? I saw the confusion on their faces. They were used to seeing me as the shadow to Aaliyah's light. They had never seen me shine. I walked into the room with my head high, moving with a predatory grace that I had kept hidden for years. The crowd parted for me instinctively. I saw Tyler spot me across the room. His smile faltered. His glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes widened, not with lust, but with a flicker of primal fear. He recognized the look on my face. It was not the look of a sister coming to apologize. It was the look of an executioner coming to work. Aaliyah saw me next. Her eyes narrowed and she stiffened her fingers, digging into Tyler's arm. She expected a sheep. Instead, a wolf had just walked into her pen. She tried to recover quickly, pasting a fake smile on her face and waving me over, but the tension in her jaw was visible even from a distance. I did not rush to them. I stopped at a passing waiter, taking a glass of champagne with a polite nod, letting them stew in their anxiety. Let them wonder why the librarian was dressed like a warrior queen. The show was about to start and I was already stealing the spotlight. The lights dimmed, focusing a single spotlight on Aaliyah. She looked like an angel descending from heaven, if angels were pathological liars wrapped in custom silk. She adjusted the microphone stand, her hand trembling just enough to be visible to the back row. A hush fell over the room, the kind of reverent silence usually reserved for church services or funerals. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice thick with unshed tears. Tonight was supposed to be just about the foundation, about giving back to the community. But as many of you know, my family faced a terrible trial yesterday, a trial that almost took everything from me. She paused, placing a protective hand over her stomach. The audience leaned in, captivated by her fragility. I was driving my sister's car, she continued, a single tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. I thought I was safe. I thought I was protected. But I did not know that the vehicle had not been serviced in years. I did not know the brakes were faulty. When I saw that deer and pressed the pedal, nothing happened. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I stood near the bar sipping my champagne, watching her masterclass in manipulation. She was not just lying, she was building a cathedral of deceit. She was taking the very real crime her husband committed and painting it as a mechanical failure caused by my imaginary negligence. I could be angry, she said, looking directly at me across the darkened room. I could blame my sister Jordan for her carelessness, for leaving those keys out, for not maintaining her property. God knows I wanted to scream when the metal crunched and the airbags deployed. But then I looked at my husband Tyler, who pulled me from the wreckage, and I realized something. Tyler wiped a fake tear from his eye, nodding solemnly at her side, playing the part of the hero perfectly. I realized that anger is a poison, she preached, her voice gaining strength. Jordan did not mean to put me in danger. She just struggles. She struggles with responsibility. She struggles to find her place in this world. And I cannot hold that against her. Because that is what family does. We forgive the broken ones. We carry the weak ones. So tonight, instead of pressing charges or casting blame, I am choosing grace. I am choosing to forgive my sister for almost taking my life. The applause started slowly, then built into a thunderous roar. People were wiping their eyes. Women were clutching their chests. They looked at Aaliyah with adoration, and then turned to look at me with a mixture of pity and judgment. To them, I was the broken sister, the fuck-up who had been graciously absolved by the saint on stage. They saw her mercy. They did not see the dagger hidden behind her back. Aaliyah basked in the adulation, soaking up the applause like sunlight. She motioned for silence, a benevolent smile playing on her lips. And now I would like to invite Jordan up here. She has something she wants to say. A peace offering. Come up here, Jordan. Let us show everyone that love is stronger than mistakes. The spotlight swung across the room, blinding me for a second before settling on my face. The crowd parted, creating a walkway to the stage. It was a walk of shame designed to end in my total submission. I handed my empty glass to a waiter. I smoothed the silk of my dress. I did not look down. I did not look ashamed. I walked toward the stage with the rhythmic click of my heels echoing in the silence. I was coming up there all right, but I was not bringing an apology. I was bringing the truth. The wooden steps of the stage felt miles high as I ascended them. With every click of my heels against the polished riser, the hum of conversation in the room died down, until the only sound was the air conditioning system and the beating of my own heart. I reached the center of the stage where Aaliyah was waiting. She looked at me with the benevolence of a queen granting an audience to a peasant. She handed me the heavy wireless microphone, her fingers brushing against mine. Her skin was cold and clammy despite the heat of the spotlights. "Do not embarrass me," she hissed under her breath, her lips barely moving behind her frozen smile. "Just read the paper and get off." I took the microphone. It felt heavy in my hand like a gavel. I turned to face the room. The glare of the spotlight was blinding, creating a wall of white light that separated me from the audience. I had to squint to see the faces in the darkness. In the front row, directly in my line of sight, sat my mother. Beatrice was leaning forward in her chair, her hands gripping her clutch so tightly her knuckles were white. She caught my eye and tapped her temple, a silent command to remember the lines. Then she made a small, subtle motion with her hand, mimicking the turning of a page. "Stick to the script." Next to her, Tyler was leaning back with his arm draped over the empty chair beside him. He looked relaxed, almost bored. He took a sip of his drink, watching me with a smug expression that said he had already won. He thought I was up here to save him. He thought I was about to publicly confess to his crime to protect his reputation and his bank account. I reached into the pocket of my silk dress. I felt the sharp corner of the folded paper Aaliyah had given me that morning. The apology, the confession, the lie that would cement my role as the family failure forever. I wrapped my fingers around it. The room held its breath. I could feel their pity washing over me in waves. They were waiting for the stuttering, the tears, the cracking voice of the broken sister. They were waiting for me to play my part in Aaliyah's tragedy. I pulled my hand out of my pocket, but I did not pull out the paper. My hand was empty. I placed both hands on the microphone stand, steadying myself. I looked down at Aaliyah, who was standing just a few feet away, beaming at the audience. She did not notice that my hands were empty yet. She was too busy posing for the photographers. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice boomed through the speakers, clear and steady. There was no tremor, no hesitation. It was the voice I used in boardrooms when I was acquiring companies. It was the voice of authority. Tyler frowned slightly, sitting up a little straighter. He heard the tone. It was not the tone of a woman about to apologize. "My sister has told you a very moving story tonight." I continued, looking directly at Beatrice, whose eyes had widened in alarm. "She told you about an accident. She told you about fear. And she told you about forgiveness. She stood up here and spoke about the importance of family and how we must protect each other no matter the cost." I paused, letting the silence stretch. I saw Aaliyah's smile falter. She turned her head slightly, trying to make eye contact with me, her eyes darting with confusion. "This was not in the script, but there is one detail my sister left out of her story," I said, leaning closer to the mic. "A detail that changes everything. You see, forgiveness is easy when you are the one asking for it. But justice is much harder to swallow." Beatrice stood up halfway in her seat, her mouth opening to interrupt me. But it was too late. I had the floor, I had the microphone, and I had the truth. "I am not here to apologize," I said, my voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "I am here to clarify. Aaliyah said she was driving my car. That was the first lie." The gasp from the audience was audible. Aaliyah's face drained of all color. The trap was sprung. "You told everyone I was negligent, Aaliyah," I said, my voice slicing through the tension in the room like a scalpel. "You told them I left my keys out. You told them I endangered your life. But you failed to check one very important detail before you decided to take what did not belong to you." I reached into the podium and pulled out a small black remote. The massive screen behind me, which had been displaying a slideshow of Aaliyah's charity work and maternity photos, flickered. The image of Aaliyah cradling her bump vanished. I pressed the button. A high-resolution scan of a vehicle registration document appeared on the 20-foot screen. It was magnified so clearly that even the people standing by the bar could read the fine print. The silence in the room shifted from confused to stunned. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you look at the screen, you will see the official registration for the vehicle that was destroyed in the driveway yesterday morning," I narrated, walking out from behind the podium to stand center stage. "It is a Ford Explorer. It is not a Porsche. And if you look at the line marked registered owner, you will see that it does not say Jordan Banks." I turned to look directly at the front table. "It says Beatrice Banks." I watched the realization hit my mother like a physical blow. Beatrice froze. The glass of wine she had been holding slipped from her fingers and shattered on the floor, spilling red liquid across the white tablecloth like a fresh wound. She did not even notice. Her eyes were locked on the screen, staring at her own name. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She was doing the math in her head. She knew exactly what this meant. She had not just sat by and watched Aaliyah destroy my property. She had cheered while Aaliyah destroyed her own. "I swapped the keys, Mom," I said, speaking directly to her, ignoring the 300 other people in the room. "I knew they were going to take the car. I heard them planning it. So I switched my key fob with yours. I wanted to see what you would do. I wanted to see if you would defend me when you thought I was the victim. But you didn't. You slapped me. You blamed me. You forced me to pay for the damages." Tyler jumped to his feet. his chair scraping loudly against the floor. He looked from the screen to me, his face twisting into a mask of panic. He realized instantly that the financial safety net he thought he had was gone. "That is impossible," he stammered, his voice loud in the quiet room. "We drove the Porsche. I felt the engine. I know what I drove." I looked at him with pity. "You drove what you wanted to drive, Tyler. You were too drunk to know the difference between a luxury SUV and a Ford. And because you were so arrogant, you never bothered to check. You just assumed you were entitled to my things." The crowd began to murmur. The narrative was crumbling. The victim was becoming the thief. "So Aaliyah." I continued, turning back to my sister, who was shaking her head in denial. "You did not almost die because of my negligence. You crashed our mother's car because you stole keys that you thought were mine. You destroyed her asset, not mine." And Mom, I hope you enjoyed that applause earlier, because that wrecked car sitting in the impound lot is entirely your problem now. But wait, it gets worse. I watched the color drain from my mother's face as the realization hit her. She was not just the owner of a wrecked car, she was the owner of a financial disaster. I took a step closer to the edge of the stage, looming over them like a judge passing a final sentence. The audience was paralyzed, caught between the horror of the revelation and the thrill of the scandal. "You see, Tyler was very specific this morning," I said, my voice echoing through the silent ballroom. "He demanded I use my insurance to cover the damages. He bullied me into writing a check for repairs to keep this quiet. He even threatened to ruin my reputation if I did not pay up. But there is a poetic justice in greed. It blinds you to the details." I clicked the remote again. The registration document on the screen vanished, replaced by a scanned letter from an insurance company. The date was from last week. The logo was unmistakable. "Mom, do you recognize this?" I asked, my voice dripping with faux concern. "This is the cancellation notice for your auto insurance policy. You called your agent last Tuesday. You told him you wanted to drop collision and comprehensive coverage on the Ford to save money. You told him you needed the prorated refund check immediately." Beatrice let out a strangled sound, half gasp, half sob. She clutched the tablecloth as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. She knew exactly why she had done it. She had stripped her own assets to feed the leech sitting next to her. "You needed the cash," I continued relentlessly. "You liquidated your safety net to give Tyler $5,000 for his investment firm. You bet your own security on his gambling addiction. You stripped the protection from your own vehicle to fund his lifestyle. And now look where it got you." I pointed to the document on the screen, tracing the cancellation date with the laser pointer. "Because you canceled that policy, that car is completely uninsured. There is no coverage for the damage. There is no coverage for the tow truck. And there is certainly no coverage for the $85,000 repair estimate Tyler handed me this morning." The room erupted in whispers. I could hear the word uninsured rippling through the crowd like a contagion. In their world, being uninsured was a sin worse than adultery. It meant you were insolvent. It meant you were irresponsible. It meant you were broke. "So that bill, Mom," I said, staring her down. "That is not my debt. That is yours. You destroyed your own car to fund a man who then crashed it. You are liable for every single penny. And as for the check I wrote you this morning to keep the peace." I reached into my clutch and pulled out my phone. I tapped the screen 3 times, showing the banking app to the camera, projecting it onto the massive screen behind me for everyone to see. The words "Payment Stopped" glowed in bright red letters. I canceled it before the ink was even dry. "You are on your own, Beatrice. You wanted to be the matriarch. You wanted to enable them. Now you can pay the price for it. $80,000. I hope you have it in liquid assets, because from what I have seen of your accounts, you are going to have to sell a lot more than just a car to cover this." Tyler moved first. The survival instinct of a cornered rat finally kicked in, overcoming his shock. He shoved his chair back with enough force to knock it over, sending it crashing to the floor. His face was a mask of purple rage, veins bulging in his neck as he scrambled toward the stairs. He was not coming to debate. He was coming to silence me physically if necessary. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Cut the mic! Someone get her off the stage! She is lying! She is mentally unstable!" Security guards hesitated, looking between the well-dressed man screaming like a lunatic and the composed woman standing at the podium. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I simply watched him run, knowing he would never reach me in time. I had one button left to push. "You wanted the truth about the accident," I said, my voice booming over his screams. "You wanted to know who almost killed an unborn child. Let us go to the tape." I hit the play button on the remote. The massive screen behind me went black for a split second before exploding into high-definition color. The footage was from the interior dashcam of the Ford Explorer, timestamped exactly 30 hours ago. The angle was wide, capturing both the driver and the passenger seats perfectly. The entire ballroom gasped in unison. There was no deer. There was no mechanical failure. And most damning of all, there was no Aaliyah in the driver's seat. Tyler was behind the wheel. He was holding a bottle of champagne in one hand, steering with the other. His tie was undone, his eyes were glazed, and his head was lolling back against the headrest. Next to him, Aaliyah was not in distress. She was not clutching her stomach in pain. She was laughing. She was filming him with her phone, cheering him on. "Go faster, babe!" The Aaliyah on the screen shrieked, her voice slurred and reckless. "See what this piece of junk can do. Jordan never drives it over 60. She is such a grandma." "Watch this," Tyler mumbled, raising the bottle to his lips. "I am going to drift around the oak tree." The audience watched in horrified silence as the car swerved violently. The laughter turned into screams. The camera shook. Then came the impact. The sound of metal crumpling against wood was amplified through the ballroom speakers, making everyone jump. The screen went chaotic as the airbags deployed, filling the cabin with white dust. But the recording did not end there. In the aftermath, the audio was crystal clear. "Oh my God, Tyler," Aaliyah whimpered. "We are screwed. We are so screwed. You are drunk. You are going to jail." "No, I am not," Tyler's voice replied, thick with intoxication. "We will switch seats. You are pregnant. They won't breathalyze a pregnant woman. We will tell them it was a deer. We will tell them Jordan left the keys out. We will make her pay for it. She is desperate for us to like her. She will fix it." I paused the video on the freeze frame of Tyler's face, right as he realized he had crashed. I turned to look at the real Tyler, who had frozen halfway up the stairs. He looked like a man who had been shot. The security guards were no longer hesitant. Two of them moved to block his path, their hands hovering over their holsters. "So there you have it," I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "No deer, no brake failure. Just a drunk driver and his accomplice conspiring to commit insurance fraud and file a false police report. And they decided the best way to cover their tracks was to frame the sister who has paid for their entire lives." I looked at Aaliyah. She was trembling so violently her pearl-encrusted gown was shaking. The saintly mother figure had vanished, leaving behind a scared, vindictive girl who had just been exposed as a criminal. "The police have already received a copy of this footage," I announced, "and I believe they are waiting outside right now to ask you a few questions about who exactly was driving that car." I looked down at Tyler, who was breathing heavily at the bottom of the stairs, his face a mixture of rage and terror. He thought the exposure of his drunk driving was the climax of the evening. He thought the worst thing he had done was wrap a Ford Explorer around an oak tree on private property. He was wrong. "You seem to think this is just a family dispute, Tyler," I said into the microphone, my voice calm and terrifying. "You seem to think that because you only hit a tree, you are the victim of bad luck. But the camera does not just record the crash, it records the journey. And your journey started 10 minutes before you hit that tree." I pressed the rewind button on the remote. The video on the massive screen reversed rapidly, the images blurring until the timestamp in the corner read 11:45 p.m. I hit play. The perspective shifted. The Ford Explorer was moving down a residential street, now swerving between lanes. Tyler was singing along to the radio, his words slurred. Aaliyah was laughing, filming him with her phone, encouraging him to drive faster. Then came the intersection. A silver sedan was parked legally on the side of the road. Tyler took the turn too wide. The sound of the impact was sickening, a loud, grinding crunch that shook the speakers in the ballroom. The Ford's side mirror was sheared off. The sedan's bumper was torn away. "Stop!" Aaliyah screamed on the video. "You hit them! You hit that car!" Tyler did not brake. He did not pull over to check for passengers. He slammed on the accelerator. The engine roared as the Ford sped away from the scene, leaving a trail of debris behind. "Do not look back," Tyler shouted on the screen. "Just go. If we stop, we get arrested. Drive." The video froze on the image of the damaged sedan receding in the rearview mirror. I looked out at the audience. The pity they had felt for Aaliyah moments ago had evaporated, replaced by cold, hard disgust. They were looking at a hit-and-run driver and his accomplice. "You fled the scene of a crime," I said, pointing a finger at Tyler. "That is a felony. And that silver sedan you hit belongs to a single mother who needs it to get to work. You destroyed her livelihood, and then you ran away to drink more champagne and crash my mother's car." Suddenly, the heavy atmosphere in the room was pierced by a new sound. It started faint, but grew louder by the second, rising above the murmurs of the crowd. Sirens. Distinct, shrill police sirens. Blue and red lights began to flash against the high windows of the ballroom, painting the horrified faces of the guests in alternating colors of emergency. I checked my watch theatrically. "Right on time," I said. "I told you I had a surprise for you. Those are not for me. They are here for the man who committed a hit and run and the woman who helped him cover it up. Enjoy your party, Aaliyah. I think your ride is here." The heavy mahogany doors of the ballroom did not open politely this time. They were thrown wide by 4 uniformed officers who marched into the sea of silk and tuxedos with the grim determination of men who had seen the evidence and were done with the games. The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, hard reality of the law. The blue strobe lights from the cruisers outside cut through the crystal chandeliers, painting the guests' faces in jagged, frantic shadows. Tyler stood at the bottom of the stairs, his face pale and sweating. He looked like a trapped animal. He tried to straighten his jacket to summon the ghost of his arrogance, but his hands were shaking too badly. When the lead officer, a stern woman with a no-nonsense expression, approached him, he instinctively took a step back, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of champagne glasses crashing to the floor. The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. "Tyler Davis," the officer announced, her voice cutting through the tension. "You are under arrest for felony hit-and-run, driving under the influence, and filing a false police report. Turn around and place your hands behind your back." Tyler's eyes darted around the room, searching for an exit, searching for an ally. He looked at the donors who were staring at him with open disgust. He looked at Beatrice, who was slumped in her chair, clutching her chest. Finally, he looked at Aaliyah, who was standing frozen on the stage near me. "No, wait, you have got this all wrong," Tyler stammered, holding his hands up in a pathetic gesture of surrender. "I was not driving. Look at the video. It was dark. You cannot tell who it is. It was her." He pointed a shaking finger at his pregnant wife. The crowd gasped. The perfect husband, the doting father-to-be, was throwing the mother of his child under the bus to save his own skin. "She made me switch seats," he screamed, his voice rising to a hysterical pitch as the officer grabbed his wrist and spun him around. "She is the one who wanted to go fast. She is the crazy one. She told me to drive away. I wanted to stop, but she threatened me. She said she would ruin my career if I stopped. Arrest her. She is the accomplice." The metallic click of the handcuffs ratcheted through the silence, sealing his fate. The illusion of the noble aristocratic son-in-law shattered into 1,000 pieces. He was not a businessman. He was not a leader. He was a coward in a rented tuxedo, desperately trying to frame his wife for his own recklessness. Aaliyah let out a sob of pure betrayal, her hands flying to her mouth. She watched as the man she had championed, the man she had helped destroy my life, turned on her without a second thought. "Get off me!" Tyler yelled, struggling as two more officers moved in to secure him. You cannot do this. Do you know who I am? I am a partner at Vantage Point Ventures. I have rights. Jordan, tell them. Tell them I am innocent. He looked up at me, his eyes pleading desperate. I stood on the stage, looking down at him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a specimen. I did not speak. I did not look away. I simply raised my champagne glass in a silent toast as they dragged him kicking and screaming toward the exit. The King of Buckhead was leaving the building, and he was not leaving in a carriage. He was leaving in the back of a squad car. The heavy doors swung shut, cutting off Tyler's desperate pleas and leaving a suffocating silence in the ballroom. All eyes turned to Aaliyah. She stood center stage, her hands still hovering near her stomach, in a pose that had elicited sympathy only minutes ago, but now looked like a grotesque pantomime. The spotlight that had been her ally was now an interrogation lamp exposing every crack in her porcelain veneer. She looked out at the audience expecting to find pity. Instead, she found a sea of glowing rectangles. Every smartphone in the room was raised. The red recording lights blinked like hundreds of tiny accusatory eyes. She was not just being judged by the 300 people in the room. She was being live-streamed to thousands of social climbers and gossip columnists across Atlanta. The comment sections were likely already burning with the hashtag fraud. Mrs. Wellington, the grand dame of Atlanta philanthropy and the primary donor for the evening, was the first to move. She stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her Chanel suit with a look of absolute revulsion. She did not look at Aaliyah. She looked at her husband and signaled for him to retrieve her coat. The sound of her chair scraping against the floor was the first domino. Wait, Aaliyah stammered, stepping forward, her voice trembling. Mrs. Wellington, please do not leave. This is all a misunderstanding. Tyler is unwell. But the foundation, the babies, we still need your support. Mrs. Wellington paused, turning her head just enough to address the room without acknowledging Aaliyah directly. I do not support criminals, my dear, and I certainly do not write checks to women who frame their own sisters to cover up a felony. This organization is a sham. She walked out. The dam broke. The room erupted into a flurry of movement. It was a mass exodus. Chairs were pushed back, napkins were thrown onto half-eaten plates, and the air filled with the murmur of scandalized whispers. The checkbooks that had been open on the tables were snapped shut. The silence was replaced by the rustle of silk and the click of heels as the city's elite fled the scene of the social crime. Aaliyah watched them go, her eyes wide with panic. No, stop. Please. The valet hasn't even brought your cars yet. Just stay for dessert. We have a chocolate fountain. Her desperation was palpable and pathetic. She was begging people to eat chocolate while her husband was being booked for a hit and run. I watched from the side of the stage, sipping the last of my champagne. This was the true death of Aaliyah Banks. Not a physical death, but a social one. In this town, reputation was currency, and she had just declared bankruptcy. A young influencer in the front row, whom Aaliyah had courted for months, stood up and pointed her phone directly at Aaliyah's tear-streaked face. Say hi to the internet, sweetie, the girl sneered. You are trending. But not for the reasons you wanted. #scammer. Aaliyah flinched as if she had been slapped. She looked at me, then a flicker of pure hatred burning through her tears. She wanted to scream at me. She wanted to blame me. But she couldn't. Because the camera was still rolling, and for the first time in her life she had no script to hide behind. She was alone on an empty stage in a dress she couldn't afford, presiding over a gala for a charity that no longer existed. The applause had ended. The show was over. The silence in the limousine on the ride back to the estate was heavy enough to crush bones. Aaliyah sat in the corner, sobbing quietly into a crumpled tissue, while Beatrice stared out the window, her reflection ghosting against the passing streetlights like a specter. But the moment the heavy oak front door of the villa clicked shut behind us, the silence detonated. Beatrice spun around so fast she nearly lost her balance. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated hatred. She threw her expensive clutch onto the foyer table with a violence that made the crystal vase rattle. "I hope you are happy," she screamed, her voice shrill and echoing off the marble floors. "I hope you are satisfied, you vicious little viper. Look at what you have done. You have destroyed this family. You have humiliated your sister. You have sent a good man to jail. And for what? For a moment of attention. Because you could not stand to see them shine." I stood by the door, my clutch still in my hand, watching her unravel. It was fascinating in a morbid way. Even now, after seeing the video, after seeing the police report, she was still defending them. To her, the crime wasn't the hit and run. The crime was me telling the truth about it. "You did this on purpose," Beatrice spat, walking toward me with a menacing gait. "You planned this. You waited until the most important night of Aaliyah's life to ambush her. You could have come to us quietly. We could have handled this like a family. But no, you had to drag us through the mud in front of the entire city. Do you have any idea how much money we lost tonight? Do you have any idea what Mrs. Wellington is going to say to the board tomorrow?" She was not worried about the woman Tyler had hit. She was worried about her social standing. "Aaliyah is pregnant, Jordan," she shrieked, pointing at my sister, who was now draped dramatically over the staircase railing, weeping. "You put that baby at risk with your stunts. You stressed her out to the point of collapse. If she loses this child, it is on your hands. You are a monster, a jealous, bitter, barren monster." I looked at Aaliyah. She wasn't stressed. She was terrified. She knew that without Tyler to hide behind, she was exposed, but Beatrice was too blind to see it. "Get out," Beatrice hissed, pointing a trembling finger at the door. "I want you out of my house. Tonight. I do not want to see your face in the morning. Pack your trash and go back to that cold, empty condo of yours. You are no daughter of mine. You are a cancer, and I am cutting you out." She thought she was wielding the ultimate punishment. She thought that banishing me from the family estate would break me. She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to beg, waiting for me to apologize. She wanted me to fall to my knees and plead for forgiveness so she could graciously deny it. I looked around the foyer. I looked at the chandelier I had paid to restore. I looked at the marble floors I had paid to polish. And finally, I looked at the woman who had birthed me but never loved me. She was evicting me from a house she no longer owned. "Very well, Mother," I said, my voice calm and low. "I will leave. I have some business to attend to anyway. But before I go, there is one last thing you need to see." I reached into my bag and pulled out the red folder my lawyer had handed me at the gala. Beatrice's eyes narrowed. She recognized the color of legal urgency. I held it out to her. "You might want to read this before you start throwing people out," I said. "It concerns the ownership of this house. And unfortunately for you, the landlord has a very different opinion on who gets to stay and who has to leave." Beatrice snatched the red folder from my hand, tearing it open with a desperation that betrayed her fear. She expected a lawsuit. She expected a restraining order. She did not expect a property deed. Her eyes scanned the document rapidly, her lips moving silently as she read the legalese. Then she stopped. Her breath hitched in her throat. She looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the paper. "This is a mistake," she whispered, her voice trembling. This says you are the owner." "It is not a mistake, Mother," I said, stepping past her to lean against the console table she had claimed was hers for 30 years. "It is a transfer of title. Look at the date, October 14th of last year." Beatrice shook her head violently. "No, that is impossible. We took out a bridge loan, just a temporary liquidity injection to help Tyler cover some overhead. We signed papers with the bank." "Not with you. You signed papers with a shell company," I corrected her, my voice devoid of pity. "A company that I own. You were in default, Beatrice. You had missed 3 payments because you were funneling every spare dime into Tyler's pockets. The bank was preparing to foreclose. They were going to put this house on the auction block within 30 days. I stepped in and bought the note. I paid off your arrears. And in exchange, I took the title." I watched the realization wash over her. She was not the lady of the manor. She was a tenant living on my charity. But why, she stammered. Why didn't you tell us? Because you would have bled me dry, I said simply. You mortgaged this house to pay off Tyler's gambling debts. Do not look so shocked, Aaliyah. Did he tell you it was a bad market turn? Did he tell you it was a failed startup investment? He lost $200,000 at the blackjack tables in Las Vegas. Mom knew. She signed the house away to keep his legs from getting broken by loan sharks. And instead of thanking me for saving your home, you treated me like a servant in it. Aaliyah let out a sharp gasp, looking at her mother with wide, betrayed eyes. You knew. You knew he gambled away our inheritance. Beatrice ignored her, keeping her gaze fixed on me with a mixture of hatred and awe. She had underestimated me for 3 decades, and now she was looking at the architect of her survival and her destruction. So you see, Mother, I said, walking over to pluck the deed from her frozen fingers. You cannot kick me out. You cannot banish me to the guest room. You cannot tell me to leave. Because this is my house. These are my floors. That chandelier is mine. And you are here only because I allow it. You are not the matriarch anymore. You are a squatter with an attitude problem. And frankly, I am tired of being a lenient landlord. I watched the reality settle into the fine lines of my mother's face. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a woman who had just realized she was standing on a trap door. She looked around the foyer as if seeing the walls for the first time, not as her kingdom, but as a foreclosure sign. You cannot mean that, she whispered, her voice trembling. This is our home. This is where you grew up. You cannot just sell it out from under us. Where are we supposed to go? I carefully smoothed the edge of the deed before sliding it back into the red folder. The sentimental appeal was her last weapon, and it was firing blanks. I looked at the grand staircase, the crystal chandelier, and the marble floors. I did not see a home. I saw a ledger. I saw a liability that had been bleeding me dry for years. This is not a home. Mother, I said, my voice devoid of warmth. It is a distressed asset. And like any good investor, I know when to cut my losses. I am liquidating the portfolio. That includes the car, the debt, and this house. I stepped closer to them, making sure Aaliyah could hear every word. She was slumped against the wall, looking like a ghost in her ruined gown. You have 72 hours, I announced, checking my watch as if scheduling a meeting. That is 3 days to pack your personal effects and vacate the premises. I have a real estate agent coming on Monday morning to stage the property for listing. I expect the house to be empty and broom swept by then. Anything left behind will be considered trash and hauled away. Aaliyah let out a strangled sob, pushing herself off the wall. But Jordan, she wailed, her hands shaking. Tyler is in jail. I have no money. I have a baby coming in 2 months. You cannot throw a pregnant woman onto the street. You are my sister. I looked at her. I looked at the sister who had mocked my career, who had stolen my keys, who had tried to frame me for a felony just hours ago. The sister who had laughed while I paid her bills. You should have thought about that before you conspired to ruin me, Aaliyah, I said coldly. You wanted to play grown-up games. Now you win grown-up prizes. Tyler gambled away your safety net. Mom mortgaged your roof. And you burned the only bridge you had left when you tried to destroy my reputation on a live stream. Beatrice grabbed my arm, her grip desperate and weak. Jordan, please. Be reasonable. We have nowhere else to go. The market is terrible. We have no credit. Just give us a few months. Just until the baby is born. I pulled my arm away, brushing the fabric of my dress where she had touched me. No, I said. You had 30 years to be reasonable. You had 30 years to treat me like a daughter instead of an ATM. My generosity expired the moment you slapped me this morning. You have 3 days. If you are not out by noon on Monday, I will have the sheriff execute an eviction order. And unlike you, I do not make idle threats. I turned my back on them, walking toward the front door. The sound of Aaliyah's weeping and Beatrice's stunned silence filled the cavernous hall. I opened the heavy oak door and stepped out into the cool night air. The sirens had faded, leaving only the chirping of crickets. I walked to my car without looking back. Behind me, the lights of the estate still blazed golden and warm, but to me they looked like the flames of a bridge finally burning down. I started the engine. It was time to go home to my quiet, empty condo and sleep the best sleep of my life. The sound of my hand on the brass doorknob was the only trigger Beatrice needed to change tactics. She realized in a split second that anger had failed, that authority had evaporated, and that legal threats were useless against the owner of the deed. So she reached for the only weapon she had left in her arsenal. She reached for the guilt of a mother. She threw herself between me and the door, her knees hitting the marble floor with a hollow thud that was meant to break my heart. She grabbed the hem of my silk dress, her fingers clutching the fabric like a drowning woman clutching a lifeline. Tears, real or manufactured, streamed down her face, ruining her heavy mascara and leaving black streaks across her cheeks. "Jordan, please," she sobbed, her voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. "You are my baby. I changed your diapers. I nursed you when you were sick. I sat up with you when you had nightmares. How can you be so cruel? How can you throw your own mother out on the street like a dog?" I looked down at her. For years, this display would have worked. For years, the sight of my mother in distress would have made me open my checkbook and apologize for existing. But tonight, all I saw was a performance. I saw a woman who had sold my childhood to pay for her favorite daughter's mistakes and was now trying to bill me for the emotional labor of raising me. "I am not throwing you out, Mother," I said, my voice flat and devoid of the sympathy she craved. "I am liquidating an asset. It is a business decision. You of all people should understand that. You sold my trust fund to buy Tyler a boat, remember? You told me it was just business then." Beatrice shook her head violently, pressing her face against my skirt. "This is different. This is our home. Your memories are here. The marks on the wall where we measured your height. The garden where you learned to walk. You cannot put a price tag on that. You cannot just discard us like we mean nothing to you." I gently but firmly pulled my dress from her grip, taking a step back to create a chasm between us. I looked at Aaliyah, who was watching us with wide, terrified eyes, waiting to see if the emotional blackmail would work. "I seem to recall a conversation we had at breakfast just this morning," I said, tilting my head slightly, as if trying to remember a trivial detail. "When I was upset that my sister had stolen and destroyed my vehicle. Do you remember what you said to me, Beatrice?" She looked up, blinking through her tears, confusion clouding her face. "You told me I was being petty." I continued, my voice hardening into diamond. "You told me not to be so attached to material things. You said, and I quote, 'It is just a car.' You asked me why I was making such a fuss over metal and plastic when family was safe. You said objects can be replaced." I gestured wide around the foyer, taking in the sweeping staircase and the vaulted ceiling. "So why are you crying now, Mother? It is just a house. It is just wood and brick and drywall. Surely you are not so shallow that you care more about this building than you do about the lesson in responsibility I am teaching you." Beatrice's mouth fell open, the trap snapping shut around her own logic. She tried to stammer a defense, but I cut her off. "You have each other," I said, opening the door and letting the humid night air flood the air-conditioned hall. "You have the family you chose. You have the loyalty you demanded. You do not need this house to be happy, unless, of course, you only cared about the luxury it provided." I stepped out onto the porch. Monday at noon. Beatrice. "Do not make me call the sheriff. He is already having a busy night with your son-in-law, and I would hate to add to his paperwork." I pulled the heavy door shut. The click of the latch was the most satisfying sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing. It was the sound of the end. The unraveling of Aaliyah's life did not happen in slow motion. It happened with the violent speed of a car crash. The morning after the gala, while I was sipping coffee in my condo, the news broke that Tyler had not gone down quietly. In the interrogation room, faced with a felony charge and potential prison time, The doting husband had turned into a desperate snitch. He didn't just confess. He implicated Aaliyah in everything. He told the detectives she had encouraged the speeding. He told them she had filmed the reckless driving for social media clout. He even claimed she had masterminded the plan to frame me for the accident because she was jealous of my success. By noon, the police were back at the estate. They were not there for tea. They were there to serve Aaliyah with a notice of investigation for aiding and abetting a felony and conspiracy to obstruct justice. She wasn't arrested solely because of the high-risk pregnancy, but her passport was surrendered, and her assets were frozen pending the investigation. The golden couple was no longer a team. They were co-defendants in a cage match fighting for a plea deal. I watched the fallout from a distance, monitoring the situation like a stock ticker. The New Beginnings Foundation collapsed before it even launched. The board members resigned en masse, terrified of being associated with a fraudster. The donors demanded their money back, and the internet, which Aaliyah had courted so assiduously, turned on her with the ferocity of a starving pack of wolves. Her social media channels were flooded with hate comments. The hashtag scammer Aaliyah was trending higher than the gala itself ever had. She had wanted fame, she got infamy. Monday morning arrived with a gray drizzle that matched the mood of the eviction. I pulled up to the estate at 11 o'clock, an hour early, to supervise the turnover. The driveway was not filled with luxury cars this time. It was occupied by a rusted moving van and a small sedan that belonged to Beatrice's distant cousin, the only family member willing to take them in. The house was a shell. The staging furniture I had paid for was gone. The art was off the walls, leaving pale rectangles on the wallpaper, like ghosts. Aaliyah was sitting on a suitcase in the foyer, staring at her phone, her thumbs scrolling maniacally through the comments that were destroying her life. She looked small. The arrogance that had defined her for 25 years had evaporated, leaving behind a frightened girl who had never had to work for anything and now had nothing. She looked up as I entered, the click of my heels echoing on the marble. Her eyes were red-rimmed and empty. "Tyler is going to prison," she whispered, her voice hollow. "The lawyer says he is looking at 3 years minimum because of the hit and run. He ruined my life, Jordan. I have a baby coming, and I am going to be a single mother with a criminal record." I stopped in front of her, looking down at the sister who had tried to destroy me just 3 days ago. "Tyler did not ruin your life, Aaliyah," I said, my voice devoid of pity. "You ruined it together. You chose him. You enabled him. And when he crashed, you chose to lie instead of taking responsibility. You wanted the high life without the work. You wanted the prestige without the character. Now you have the consequences." She didn't argue. She didn't scream. She just stood up and grabbed the handle of her suitcase. She walked out the door, past the columns she used to pose in front of, past the garden she used to claim was hers, and into the rain. She had lost her husband. She had lost her home. She had lost her reputation. And as she climbed into the passenger seat of that battered sedan, she finally realized that she had lost the only person who could have saved her. Me. The vehicle waiting in the circular driveway was a stark insult to the architecture of the estate. It was not the sleek black S-Class my mother was accustomed to being chauffeured in, nor was it the aggressive Porsche Tyler had destroyed. It was a dented beige sedan from the late 90s, with a cracked rear bumper and a muffler that was held in place by a rusted wire. It belonged to Cousin Margaret, the only relative in the tri-state area who had not blocked Beatrice's number after the scandal broke. The car sat there, leaking a small puddle of oil onto the pristine cobblestones, coughing blue smoke into the damp air. Beatrice emerged from the front door, dragging a massive Louis Vuitton steamer trunk that was worth more than the car she was about to climb into. She looked years older than she had just 3 days ago. Her hair, usually sprayed into an immovable helmet of perfection, was limp and graying at the roots. Her face, stripped of the expensive creams and professional makeup, revealed the deep roadmap of bitterness she had been hiding for decades. She struggled with the weight of the trunk, her arms shaking. She was a woman who hadn't lifted anything heavier than a wine glass in 30 years, and now she was hauling the wreckage of her life to the curb. I stood on the porch leaning against a limestone pillar watching her struggle. I did not offer to help. I did not call the staff because I had dismissed them an hour ago with a generous severance package. This was a burden Beatrice had to carry alone. She heaved the trunk toward the open back of the sedan, but her grip slipped. The expensive leather hit the asphalt with a sickening scrape that made her wince physically. Aaliyah followed her out carrying 2 black garbage bags over her shoulder. The designer suitcases were full, so her remaining couture gowns were stuffed into trash bags like common refuse. She wasn't crying anymore. She was moving with the jerky, uncoordinated motions of someone in deep shock. She stopped at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the beige sedan with a look of absolute horror. She looked at the peeling paint and the stained upholstery visible through the window, and then she looked back at the mansion. "Get in." "Aaliyah." Beatrice snapped, her voice raspy and exhausted. "Do not just stand there. We have to go before the sheriff arrives." Aaliyah shoved the bags into the back seat next to a crate of kitchen supplies. There was no room for luxury here. They were playing Tetris with their survival. I walked down the steps slowly, the click of my heels the only sharp sound in the humid morning. Beatrice slammed the trunk of the car shut and turned to face me. Her eyes were dry and hard like flint. "Are you satisfied?" she asked. "You have taken my home. You have taken my dignity. You have stripped us bare. Is it enough for you, Jordan? Do you feel big now?" "I didn't take your dignity, Mother," I replied calmly, holding out my hand. "You sold it a long time ago. I just stopped buying it back for you." I kept my hand extended, waiting. Beatrice hesitated. She clutched the heavy brass key ring in her fist, the keys that opened the front gate, the wine cellar, the master suite. It was the scepter of her rule, and she was holding on to it with a death grip. "The keys, Beatrice," I said softly. She trembled. For a second I thought she might throw them at me. Instead, she dropped them into my palm. The metal was warm from her hand. "Goodbye, Jordan," she whispered. "I hope this house keeps you warm at night because you have no one else left." She climbed into the driver's seat of the rusted sedan. The engine sputtered and whined, struggling to turn over before finally catching with a ragged roar. I watched them drive away, the car listing heavily to the left under the weight of their baggage. They rolled through the wrought iron gates and turned onto the main road, disappearing from view. I looked down at the keys in my hand. She was wrong. I wasn't cold. I wasn't. For the first time in my life, I felt the warmth of absolute freedom. The silence that followed the departure of the beige sedan was heavy and absolute. The engine noise faded into the humid morning, leaving behind a quiet so profound it felt like the house was finally exhaling after holding its breath for 30 years. I turned back to the massive oak doors and pushed them shut. The latch clicked into place, sealing the fortress. I locked the deadbolt. Then I engaged the security chain. I was alone. Finally. Completely alone. I turned around and looked at the foyer. Without the screaming, without the accusations, without the physical presence of their toxicity, the space transformed. It was no longer a battlefield. It was just a building. A very expensive, very large building that I owned free and clear. I kicked off my high heels, leaving them where they fell on the marble. I walked barefoot across the cold stone, feeling the texture of the floor against my skin. I walked slowly, savoring the emptiness. I trailed my hand along the mahogany banister, feeling the dust-free surface. Beatrice had been so proud of this wood. She used to scream if I touched it with sticky hands as a child. Now I could carve my name into it if I wanted to. I walked past the living room where the furniture had left indentations in the carpet like phantom limbs. I stopped in the main hallway. This was the gallery, the shrine. Beatrice had curated this wall with the precision of a museum director. It was covered in framed photographs documenting the rise and rise of the Banks family. I walked down the line inspecting the propaganda. There was a studio portrait of Aaliyah at 16 wearing a crown from a beauty pageant she had only won because Beatrice donated a new scoreboard to the high school gym. She looked radiant and smug. There was a picture of Tyler and Aaliyah at their engagement party, toasting with crystal flutes, looking like the royalty of Atlanta. And there were the family portraits, dozens of them. In every single one, Beatrice and Aaliyah were center stage, bathed in light, touching affectionately. And in every single one, I was relegated to the periphery. I was always standing slightly apart, usually in a darker color, looking at the camera with a guarded expression. I was the shadow in their sunlit world, the prop they dragged out to make the family look complete. I reached out and hooked my fingers behind the heavy gilded frame of the engagement photo. I lifted it from the hook. It was heavy, dense with the weight of their pretension. I looked at Aaliyah's fake smile one last time. I let go. Gravity took over. The frame hit the marble floor with a violence that echoed through the empty house. The glass shattered instantly, exploding outward in a starburst of glittering shards. The photo inside buckled and tore. I moved to the next one, a picture of Beatrice accepting an award for charity work she never actually did. I ripped it off the wall and threw it down. Crash! I kept walking, moving down the hallway with a rhythmic destruction. Aaliyah's graduation. Crash. The family Christmas card from 2018. Crash. Tyler on his boat. Crash. I did not run. I did not scream. I moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a gardener pruning dead branches. I stripped the walls bare. I turned the hallway from a monument of lies into a graveyard of memories. When I reached the end of the hall, I turned back. The floor was a river of broken glass and twisted metal. The photos lay amidst the debris, their smiling faces distorted and broken. The walls were scarred with empty hooks and pale squares where the frames had hung, but they looked beautiful to me. They looked clean. They looked like a blank canvas. I stood in the center of the wreckage and took a deep breath. The air didn't smell like Beatrice's cloying perfume anymore. It smelled like dust and rain and victory. I walked back toward the kitchen, leaving footprints in the dust. The house was purged. The idols were smashed. Now it was just real estate. The noise of the breaking glass faded into memory as I stepped into the hushed elegance of the Sterling Club 2 hours later. The air here smelled of old leather books and expensive scotch, a stark contrast to the dust and deception I had left behind at the estate. I walked toward the corner table by the window overlooking the city. A man was already waiting for me. Julian was everything Tyler pretended to be but never was. He was a senior partner at the city's most prestigious law firm, a man who had built his reputation on integrity rather than inheritance. He did not check his watch when he saw me. He did not look annoyed that I was 3 minutes late. Instead, he stood up immediately, buttoning his jacket out of habit and pulling out the chair for me. "Good afternoon, Jordan," he said, his voice warm and steady. "You look like a woman who just won a war." I sat down, placing my clutch on the table. I felt lighter. The physical weight of the house keys was gone from my purse, and the emotional weight of my family was gone from my soul. "I did not win a war, Julian," I corrected him, picking up the menu. "I just stopped fighting a losing battle. The house is empty. The keys are with the listing agent. I want it sold as is. I do not want to fix the roof. I do not want to stage it. Just liquidate it." Julian nodded, making a note in his leather folio. He did not question my decision. He did not ask about my mother or offer empty platitudes about family reconciliation. He respected my judgment implicitly. "Consider it done," he said, closing the folio. "The market is hot. We will have multiple offers by Friday. But that is not the only reason I asked you here today." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue linen. He slid it across the mahogany table toward me. "I know you have been focused on cleaning up the past," he said, leaning forward, his eyes bright with intelligence. "But I have been looking at your future. This is the prospectus for the renewable energy consortium we discussed last month. They need a lead investor. But more than that, they need a strategist. They need someone who understands how to restructure failing assets and turn them into gold. I opened the document. The numbers sang to me. It was complex, ambitious, and risky. It was exactly the kind of challenge I loved. They specifically asked for you. Jordan? Julian continued, his voice lowering slightly, intimate and admiring. Not your capital. You. I told them you were the sharpest mind in Atlanta. I told them you were the only person capable of steering this ship. I looked up at him. For 30 years I had been told I was difficult, cold, and unlovable. My family saw my ambition as a defect. My mother saw my success as a bank account. But looking at Julian, I realized he saw none of that. He saw a partner. He saw an equal. I ran my finger down the page, tracing the projected returns. You think I can handle this? I asked, testing him. Julian smiled, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flutter of anticipation that had nothing to do with business. Jordan, I have watched you handle a hostile takeover while your family was actively sabotaging you, he said. I have watched you build an empire with one hand tied behind your back. I think handling this will be a walk in the park for you. The question isn't whether you can handle it. The question is, are you ready to finally build something just for yourself? I looked out the window at the skyline. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the city. The wreckage of the past was in the rearview mirror. The future was sitting right in front of me, bound in blue linen and waiting for my signature. I picked up the pen. I am ready, I said, signing my name with a flourish. Let us get to work. I walked out of the Sterling Club into the warm, amber light of the late afternoon. The city stretched out before me not as a battlefield of obligations, but as a landscape of opportunity. Julian had walked me to the curb, his handshake firm, and his promise of a new partnership ringing in my ears. But as the heavy glass doors swung shut behind me, I turned my attention to the valet stand. The young attendant saw me coming and straightened his vest. He signaled to his colleague with a sharp whistle. They knew I was not waiting for a rideshare. They knew I was not waiting for a sensible sedan. For years I had driven unassuming cars to the family estate, hiding my wealth to avoid their greed. I had let them believe that the Ford Explorer was the height of my automotive ambition. I had let Tyler crash that decoy while the real prize sat safely under a tarp in a climate-controlled garage downtown. The low rumble began before the car even appeared around the corner. It was a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in my chest. Then it nosed into the sunlight. A Porsche 911 Turbo S in a custom shade of slate gray that looked like a storm cloud captured in metal. It was sleek, aggressive, and unapologetically expensive. This was the car Tyler had dreamed of driving. This was the car Aaliyah had wanted to be seen in, but they had never even known it existed. The valet opened the door with reverence. I slid into the driver's seat. The interior wrapped around me like a cockpit, carbon fiber and hand-stitched leather. No car seats, no fast food wrappers, no sticky fingerprints. It was a sanctuary of precision engineering. I placed my hands on the Alcantara steering wheel, feeling the connection to the machine. This was not a vehicle bought with a loan or a lease. It was a title held in my name, bought with the dividends of my own hard work. I pressed the ignition button. The engine barked to life, settling into a predatory idle. I shifted into gear and eased out of the valet circle. The car surged forward, eager to run. I merged onto the main avenue, the skyscrapers of Atlanta rising up on either side of me like a canyon of glass and steel. I accelerated. The G-force pressed me back into the seat, a physical reminder of my own momentum. I passed the exit for the suburbs, the exit that led to the crumbling estate, and the family I had left behind. My hand did not waver. I did not tap the brakes. I kept the wheel straight. I glanced up at the rear-view mirror. Usually this was the moment in the movie where the protagonist looks back with a single tear of regret. I looked at the reflection of the road disappearing behind me. I saw nothing but asphalt and distance. I felt nothing but the thrill of speed. As the car picked up pace, blurring the trees and buildings into streaks of color, the camera of my mind pulled back. I imagined rising above the car, soaring higher and higher, until the gray Porsche was just a silver dart, moving through the vast, intricate map of the world. The city shrank. The drama shrank. The noise of their demands faded until it was nothing but wind. Voiceover. They taught me that blood is thicker than water. They taught me that family is everything, that you must sacrifice your dignity to keep the peace. They taught me to endure. But as I watched the road open up before me, I realized they were wrong. I taught myself a different lesson. I taught myself that you cannot save people who are determined to drown. I taught myself that loyalty is earned, not inherited. And most importantly, I taught myself that my own peace is priceless. And looking at the road ahead, I can finally afford it. The most profound lesson from Jordan's story is that shared blood does not grant a license for abuse. We often confuse toxicity with loyalty, draining our own emotional and financial resources to enable family members who refuse to grow. Jordan demonstrates that setting boundaries is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary act of self-preservation. Financial independence provides the means to escape, but self-worth provides the courage to leave. You cannot save people who are determined to drown you just to stay afloat. Sometimes the most heroic thing you can do is walk away and choose your own peace. If you were in Jordan's shoes, would you have evicted them immediately or given them one last chance? Let us know in the comments.